The alignment system of Dungeons & Dragons has often come under scrutiny for the way it frames the actions of the actors of its worlds. Its interpretations have often sparked lengthy debates where some players may see them more as guidelines, while others instead construct moral codes based upon what they represent. And this is often something that needs to be covered in a session 0 so that expectations can align. In system, some spells will affect certain individuals differently depending on their alignment, and not a small number of creatures are defined by, quite literally, their relationship to this core philosophy of good versus evil, law versus chaos. But how well does this system work? Does the cosmology of Dungeons & Dragons value results rather than methods? Will it reward someone for building a Church of Pelor on the ruins of a razed and slaughtered goblin village, or punish someone who stopped the revolution of a people starving due to a famine and a lord who by the law was allowed to starve them? As becomes clear quickly, it is not an easy matter, and while some moral absolutists may point to the existence of an actual hell in D&D, actually several variations thereof, where objectively evil individuals may end up once their lives come to an end, there are still arguments to be made that even creatures as morally inflexible as the Baatezu or the Archons, or as rigorous in a sense in their perspective on order and chaos as the Modrons or Slaad, may actually on some occasions change. On the planes, nothing is impossible, no matter how improbable. Indeed, where but the planes would this system of moral codes be tested to the very limits of its potential? But for the uninitiated, it is perhaps proper to first explain briefly what these alignments are and how they work. To put it simple, consider two axes. One ranges from good through neutral and then to evil, and the other from lawful through neutral and to chaotic. So there are two instances of neutral in this case. These explain, in general terms, a person's outlook on life, but they are, in essence, a rather inflexible system by which to categorize individuals with free will, and presumably a biological system that sometimes make us act irrational to our core beliefs due to things affecting our health and or mood. Of course, there is also the established fact that sometimes what we define as good and evil are based on wildly different parameters from other people, begging the question whether there is an absolute moral authority in existence in Dungeons & Dragons, and just how deep in the details this particular Baatezu is. Baatezu? The question, that is, the eventual existence of an omnipotent moral authority, is also partly why we will later look at the factions of Sigil, who, to some extent, were created to apply a more philosophical layer of reflection to the perception of morality in Dungeons & Dragons, or at least in Planescape. Now, most creatures of the material plane, remember that's where we, Drizzt, the Mighty Nine, and all other intrepid adventurers are not bound to one alignment or the other. Great events in their lives may shake their convictions, and they may choose then another path in life. And even within the same alignment, there may be those who are more inclined towards one side of the coin or the other. Surely there are not 9 different types of individuals in the whole universe who make the exact same choices and have the exact same thoughts. That's far from how easily this is applicable. A lawful good individual is one who will often strive to uphold the law because it is, in their eyes, meant to be for the good of the many. If they consider a law unjust or unwell, they may attempt to change this for what they perceive is the better. Thus, a corrupt king may be the lawful ruler of a domain, but he is not good for it, and thus a lawful good person may use that as a justification for acting against his ruler. Lawful good characters may be somewhat flexible in their approach to these actions, or they may have a very rigorous code of honor that makes no room for interpretation, although honestly this goes for all alignments, this kind of scale. A chaotic good individual, on the other hand, would not see any natural advantage to a lawful society. They may consider that all creatures are by nature good, and that any rulership is by its very nature oppressive to this goodness. They may oppose hierarchies, organizations, and even currencies as symbols of shackles that make it difficult for goodness to flourish. Keep in mind, of course, that this does not necessarily mean that they are great enemies of the law. Many chaotic good individuals prefer to keep to themselves, or in loose communities with relatively like-minded individuals. If we take a step back and observe this on a macro level, individuality may in fact be considered an element of chaos, while unity, sometimes to the point of uniformity, is that of law. On the opposite spectrum of these are the Lawful Evil, who believe wholly in rules and agreements, but who have no qualms about using these rules to oppress others or enforce great inequality and suffering. To them, the law is above all else, and as long as the law allows it, they will happily commit whatever atrocities they may. And if they are in a position to change the law, why wouldn't they? A chaotic evil person may likewise take great pleasures in the suffering of others, but needs no justification for it. They will lie, force others into slavery or abuse, and torture without care for the consequences. To them, all that matters is their own drive and desires, damn the rest. In fact, just like how lawful and chaotic may represent uniformity and individuality, good and evil may in turn represent altruism and egoism, the desire to help others because it is the right thing to do, and the desire to help only yourself, often at the expense of others, because it is the right thing to do. A soldier who kills in the name of their tyrannical king without question may be lawful evil, as can a wicked witch who tricks the young and naive into Faustian deals with clever loopholes. A mercenary who fights for the highest bidder, merely looking for an excuse to satiate their bloodlust, may be chaotic evil, as can an ancient fiend who regularly betrays her peers in order to achieve greater power. Neutrality, which we have yet to address, is a strange beast in this scenario. In a sense, it is to do what comes naturally, and thus we can say that most animals would be what we call true neutral. Unintelligent creatures, or those ruled entirely by instinct, may be, but are not always, true neutral, and those individuals who act in order to maintain a balance are true neutral. It is perhaps one of the most difficult paths to walk, for it requires a detachment from, well, attachments most of the time. The complexity of neutrality is, in fact, such that we may require to delve even deeper into this debate at a later time. Individuals on the prime material planes are creatures of free will, created with the capacity for great good and great evil, and therefore they tend to not be defined by their birth in what they believe in. Naturally, great debates have been held regarding the issue of nature versus nurture, but we can perhaps agree that should, say, a goblin be raised by halflings, it's quite likely that said goblin may adapt a more halfling-like lifestyle due to the environments they were raised in. But if we look upon the outsiders, that is, the creatures native to the outer planes, realms defined more or less exactly by this system of morality, it is not quite that simple. A Modron, that is to say a lawful neutral creature native to the plane of Mechanus, a realm defined only by its mechanical adherence to law and predictability, may hypothetically go rogue and thus see a shift in its alignment, often towards chaos, but will often still appear to those not intimately familiar with Modron behavior as still being almost obsessed with order and structure. This is because they are, by default, creatures embodying the alignment of their plane. But make no mistake, these rogues will appear completely abhorrent to normal Modrons for reasons we shall soon see. A creature of an outer plane is by default inclined to highly value and internalize a set of behaviors and thought patterns that align with the plane, and alignment that entails. A Tanar'ri, that is to say a chaotic evil fiend, may not even question why they break oaths or happily steal and murder without mercy. To them, it is as natural as it may be for a human to eat and breathe. It's part of their nature. The very idea that someone could show them genuine compassion with no strings attached is unthinkable and honestly laughably naive to the Tanar'ri. The vast majority of them would mock and ridicule such behavior. Yet, there is always the one who starts to wonder. And that is a story as old as time in Planescape. Are we defined by our nature, What, if anything, can change the nature of a man? Fiends and celestials and modrons and slaads are sentient creatures. Can we... Modrons. Can we condemn them to an existence where they have no choice in their actions? Whether that is a pathological desire to help the weak and wounded, or to exploit them at every turn. Truthfully, it is far from impossible for a celestial being to become corrupt and wicked, twisted into serving fiendish lords of Baator or the Abyss, and as we mentioned in an earlier video, quite a few outsiders live their own lives in places like Sigil, where they are allowed to cut themselves off from the demands of their superiors and inferiors, and live their existence by their own desires, adding a surprising layer of depth to their otherwise predetermined behavior. Certainly, it would be incredibly rare to see a pit fiend care for a small and helpless puppy, or an astral deva whipping a train of debt slaves heading for the market to be sold, but it can and has happened. The planes and all life on them are ruled by belief and knowledge. Faith is a key element that we have spoken little of until now, but the planes are where clerics and paladins, blackguards and warlocks alike may find their patrons. And thus, faith is a currency often fought over, for it defines who, and more importantly what, rules where. Any astute observers, and clever cutters who have been around the planes for a while, may have noticed that both of the aforementioned Modrons and Slaads are fairly singular beings in how they represent their aspects of law and chaos. They are generally considered to be the most lawful and most chaotic creatures of the planar multiverse, although, truth be told, the Fae sometimes contend with the Slaads over who are the most chaotic, and let's not get started with which race are the exemplars of law, as that too has changed over times and editions. That aside, this brings us back to a question I'm certain must have dwelled in your mind for a while now after our discussion on the topic of moral authority. Who, on the planes, are the most good and the most evil? This question, perhaps even more than any other, has had a massive impact on the politics of the planes, and its effects have spilled onto countless worlds of the prime material plane. In fact, every day, millions upon millions upon millions of lives are spilled in a philosophical war so massive that not even a mighty wizard such as Elminster himself could possibly dream of ending it, let alone having a lasting impact on it. I speak, of course, of the Blood War. Let us first of all be clear of one thing. The Baatezu and the Tanar'ri hate each other. The Baatezu are the Lawful Evil fiends, and the Tanar'ri are the Chaotic Evil. Despite both being evil, selfish, and manipulative, their very existence is abhorrent in the eyes of the other. Ever since they were first created, this hatred has permeated their societies, and both sides can live for thousands upon thousands of years, allowing for the amassing of an endless amount of slights and debts to be incurred. The Blood War is a war over which side of evil is the true champion of evil, and any clueless Burke would perhaps consider this an overall victory for good. I mean, after all, wouldn't that just mean that evil is self-defeating? Far from it. For there are no parts in existence, be they inner, outer, prime material, or other planes, that are not touched by and involved somehow in the Blood War. There are agents of Slaad who operate against the Baatezu, favoring the chaotic Tanari who they may feel more kinship with. And there are strategies proposed and perfected in the halls of Mechanus by Primus himself to help the Baatezu gain the advantage. And the forces of good involve themselves as well, hoping perhaps to strike a decisive blow against all evil, or maybe let one side gain just enough advantage that it will win, and leave itself weak and exposed to their attacks afterwards, which may seem surprisingly underhanded if you think about it. And then there are of course those of all these factions who do the opposite, who believe that their interests lie in creating a stronger enemy to unite their own factions against, or even that evil must exist for good to have something to be, well, good against. In fact, early in the history of the Blood War, the Archons of Celestia sought to get the drop on both the Baatezu and Tanari and wipe them both out, only to find themselves temporarily united against and nearly wiped out instead. And since then, the Celestials do not wish to actively end the war, realizing that it keeps a vast majority of fiends too preoccupied to cause even worse problems. The Blood War can be, and probably is, the reason why that cult of fiendish worshippers were sacrificing the village elders at night, bringing more souls into the Blood War for their dark masters, or hoping to earn themselves enough favor to not have to join the rank and file of this conflict upon their own deaths. Orcus' desire for dominating an entire world may, in fact, only be a small piece in the massive plan of his to open up a new front on the war against the hated Baatezu, and that it truly is nothing personal, simply business. In future videos, we will explore the Blood War further, but for now it shall serve as a strong testament to how much these things matter to the inhabitants of the plains, and how insignificant a single mortal may be to the power of them. I say may, for just as a soul may be the smallest part of a greater whole, it also holds the infinite power of faith within it, which can, after all, move mountains. And before we end today's lecture, I think it is prudent that we also look at a topic we have skirted around somewhat, and that is the power of belief. To be a cleric on the plains is to know that faith is a war in itself. Faith fuels a deity, it grants them power, and allows them to rise in rank among their peers, of whom there are many. The more worshippers your deity has accumulated, the more powerful they, and perhaps in turn you, may become. But these clerics must also either come to terms with the fact that their god may not be as inalienably correct as a clueless prime may think, but rather that they are clamoring for power and influence just as much as we mortals do, or they may choose to live their lives in self-imposed denial of the existence of anything but their own god, despite daily evidence of the contrary. To be a cleric or paladin on the plains is to know more than ever that faith is a choice. It is to decide which god you will cast your lot with and support through thick and thin in the war for faith. It is not a matter of seeing a miracle and then believing, acting on pure faith. It is to face the undeniable truth that there are many, many gods out there, old and young, live or dead, who may stand for ideas similar to your chosen deity. You may, in fact, even meet your own deity, or others, and come face to face with the fact that they know their god exists just as much as you do, and they think theirs is better. Many therefore find themselves struggling with their own morality as well. Blind faith may be freeing in a sense. It is the leap into the unknown, praying that someone will catch you. It is believing that somewhere out there, an unknown force is watching over you, valuing you as you are, and knowing the nature of your heart. Knowing that your God exists, you may instead begin to doubt whether your devotion comes from a belief in what powers they stand for, or if you subconsciously picked this particular God because you hoped it would be an easy way to gain your own power and influence. And what if you find another God that more closely matches your ethos? When the curtains are parted and the way the planes work are laid bare, it is hard not to become a cynic, seeing how faith and greed and desire for power control these divine realms just as much as they do the material primes. And maybe that's why planers dislike the clueless, secretly jealous of their naivete and obliviousness to their own insignificance and to the failings of their gods.